Good morning. Today marks the first day of the enhanced measures of the phase 2, and I had a conversation with one of my companions. Why didn't the government start tomorrow? Monday, ma? And my answer is, you don't know that Sunday is the first day of the week? So I think this is something that we need to always remember. Sunday is the first day of the week, and we are here to worship God and make sure that our week is perfect moving forward. So before I actually go into my sermon, I have a quick story I want to tell that I read online. It says that kids, they will go like this every day. Mom, where's the chocolate? Mom, how many times do I need to bathe today? Mom, where's my pencil? Mom, can you help me do my bed? Mom, Dad, where's Mom? Okay, if you didn't get it, it is that mothers play an especially unique role in the family. And it is this role that I would like to share more. But at the same time, I also want to add that this doesn't mean that if you are not a mom in this crowd today here or you're online, that you can just switch off. No, Today's lesson really will give us an insight into how King Lemuel's mother gave him words of wisdom. And these same words of wisdom are like an oracle to help us guide our living. So last night I also had a unique dining-in experience, right? We so-called the last dining-in of before the COVID measures kick in. And we actually met Brother Kokshin and Sister Jasmine together with their family. And it was quite awkward because we had to try to avoid inter-table mingling, right? I mean, this is not on purpose. We didn't choose to meet, but imagine if you go like, hi, then, we can get into trouble. And I think we have, by doing, trying to avoid eye contact and all, the questions came from my kids. Daddy, why are you doing this? Can just say hi, right? I mean, we know them, isn't it? And I think our response was, yes, we definitely know them, and we definitely will also want to give some kind of covert communications to acknowledge. But at the same time, we need to show and teach our kids that the rules are the rules, and we should be setting the right example, right? Nurturing our children, teaching them that rules are there to be followed, and not, kids, you follow rules, daddy and mommy, we don't, right? We set the rules, right? It doesn't work like that. So, as I have spoken for the last 2 or 3 minutes, I hope that those at home especially, you could take the time to adjust whatever settings that you have to do. I understand some of us may be even using our phones, which are kind of small. Of course, if you're using the TV, that would be most useful. But there may be some fonts in my slides that may be a bit small. So I encourage you to take a physical Bible and to read up as we go along. And another word of, caution, I would say. If you are at home especially, I also get that when I'm telecommuting at home. It's very easy to be very distracted. So please try to make sure that we focus here, right? The idea is that we are still at worship, even though we are at home. So try not to multitask. And I understand if you have children with you at home, I have tried to make my slides as kid-friendly as possible. So you can try to use any of the pictures that I may have to try to link whatever I'm saying to the picture. So on the picture, what do we see here? Okay, I'm not saying that mothers are gorillas, huh? No, that's not the intention, right? The idea here is when you see a young, creature in that sense, right? What do you expect that young creature to be when he or she grows up? As Brother Adrian read to us earlier, Proverbs 31, the first 9 verses, speaks of the words of King Lemuel's mother, right? The words that his mother had taught him. I wouldn't go through again, but you could just follow it on your Bibles. And I want to go into the next section first in Proverbs 31. Because I think this is another section that is perhaps more familiar with many of us. So verse 10 to verse 31 speaks of the virtuous wife, where it gives examples of what should the virtuous wife do, what will a virtuous mother be like, and how a woman who fears the Lord shall praise the Lord. So for all our sisters in Christ, Proverbs 31 verses 10 to 31 will be most useful to guide the actions and the growth of a woman who fears the Lord. But this is not our text today. This will just be the homework for our female sisters. Our text today is on verses 1 to 9, whereby we try to understand King Lemuel's mother and how she instructed King Lemuel to behave and to use his authority and strength appropriately. Who is King Lemuel? So in my life, I have one friend called Lemuel. I don't know how many Lemuels do you know? But my friend Lemuel, he was a good friend of mine back in primary and secondary school. And I always wondered, wow, you have a very cool name, right, Lemuel? And only recently, as I prepared the sermon there, I realized, oh, actually, his name means belonging to God. Now, belonging to God. So, as I dug deeper, I tried to find out who was King Lemuel. Apparently, there was no proper historical evidence. Certain scholars say, well, he could be a real king, but just not recorded. Certain scholars say, well, maybe he's a pet name for King Solomon, since as good as the entire book of Proverbs, save the last 2 chapters, are written by Solomon. So perhaps the last chapter of Proverbs was also written by Solomon. It's just that maybe he used his pet name. Some also say it could be King Hezekiah. And who is it? We may not know. But the idea here is that ultimately we want to be able to see and learn what are these good words of wisdom that King Lemuel's mother has given to him. So what are the powers of a king? The quick answer is everything. If you go to 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 to 18, it speaks of how Samuel told the people of Israel, are you sure you guys want a king? You know what a king will do? He will come to you, see your land, tax 1/10 of it, see your men, get them as servants, see your women, also take them as servants, come to your homes, see whatever he wants, just take it for his own use. Are you sure you want that? That was what Samuel said. So that's also it's a reflection of how powerful and how authoritative the king can be. Of course, there's a code of conduct that has been preset for the king. in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 to 20, whereby God said that it is imperative, it is important for a king not to accumulate wealth, to accumulate servants, to accumulate excess, all for himself. The question here is, how many kings will truly follow these preset rules? And how many kings will actually end up as how Samuel has described? You know, a tyrant king perhaps, that goes around just taking whatever he wants. So, I guess the idea here of understanding a king is to say that a king has all power under him, and he can do whatever he wants, whatever he chooses. Now, the royal priesthood. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, it is said that we as Christians are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We are not just any other priesthood, like any normal priesthood, but we are a royal priesthood. Why? What does this royalty mean? And where do we get the authority to be royalty from? The answer is, comes from God, of course. And so I want to add and emphasize here that King Lemuel's mother's words are meant for royalty, yes. And although you may not be called Sir so-and-so or Your Highness so-and-so, be very sure and be very certain that as a Christian, you are royalty. You are part of the royal kingdom of God. And so it is prudent for us to study these words of wisdom, because our next generation, who hopefully will be Christians as well, will also be part of this royal priesthood. So let's unpack Proverbs 31, verses 1 to 9, with the first 3 verses. The words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him: "What, my son? And what, son of my womb? And what, son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings." So I've tried my best to emphasize in verse 2, what? As a parent myself, I can relate to this very, very well. I often will be asking my children, well, sometimes in a not very nice way, what are you doing? What time is it already? Right? There are many, many questions and whats that I will ask my children because I'm angry. I'm angry at their behavior. I'm angry at their attitude. But the idea from verse 2 and 3 probably, is that it is still a measured, oh dear, I'm giving you all the, okay. It is still a measured, controlled form of admonishment. It is not wildly losing your tempers, calling your children names, like, I don't know, King Lemuel's mother could have said, "You're not fit to be a king," or "You're just a commoner, Lemuel, ... right? No, it is just focusing on the mistake, on the sin, to identify the problems, all the potential problems. Now in verse 3, it says, "Do not go along the paths, the ways to which destroys kings." And how could we understand that? Could be found perhaps in 1 John 2:16, whereby it is quite familiar to many of us. The sins of this world are due to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So, King Lemuel's mother gave one example of women and added on this idea of kings. She probably was giving an example of what King Lemuel was doing, perhaps, but it doesn't matter here. The idea here is she was chastising him and encouraging him not to chase the things of the world. Because it is very easy for him to do so, as the king, as the one who has all power and authority, to abuse his position of privilege. So, how often have we heard this? Mothers, maybe I should throw this question to you as you ponder about it. From your children. Mommy, I want this. Can I have 2? Why not 3? How come he has this, huh? Not fair. I also want. Yada, 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 yada. Right? So how will you respond to such a thing? To give in? And even if you do give in, you add any word of advice or teaching to say that, well, I could give you, but please, you must know that maybe 1 chocolate is good enough, and not 2 or 3. In the second example, as I wrote here on this slide, wow, how did he strike? I also want to try and try and try and try. Strike could be in anything, right? Whether is it, I don't know, in Singapore, gambling, 4D, Toto, or whatever, to chase the things of this world. How did he get this promotion? I also want to get. So, when we start thinking about the things of this world, and we chase and chase and chase, think about what would be the eventual outcome. Would it destroy us in the like manner as in Proverbs 31 verse 3? The ways in which destroys kings. What do we do that destroys us? So King Lemuel's mother, in the first 3 verses, admonished him, pointing out his mistake clearly. So let's unpack the second section. Verse 4. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the justice of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to those who are bitter of heart. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. So the danger of excesses. Now, how did they use wine back in the ancient days? It's usually what I would say a liquid substitute. I guess in our world today, there are still many regions, although in Singapore we may not experience it, but there are still many regions in which they have no access or difficult access to fresh water. And so what they will do usually is to have a 50-50, 50% wine, 50% water mixture, whereby the alcohol content in the wine would sterilize the water, whether is it, I don't know where the source of the water comes from, but the idea is that it will form the liquid that will be drank by people back in the ancient world. Now the issue is this. When they drink a 50-50 mixture, they will also figure out a way to make themselves, inverted commas, happier if they decide, let's go for maybe a 70% wine, 30% water mixture. Or in the extreme, let's just go 100% wine and 0% water. And what do you get? You get intoxicated. Now, what does intoxication mean? It means to really lose your senses, an inability to focus. And then, as we know today, it might even lead to alcohol poisoning and death. But the idea here that King Lemuel's mother was saying is that your propensity to sin, your likelihood to sin increases. Why? because you are no longer aware of your surroundings. Or perhaps your awareness of the surroundings is so low that anyone who tells you anything, you may just agree without understanding it. Or perhaps you have no control or little control over what your hands do, your eyes see, your legs move, whatever. So in verses 4 and 5, King Lemuel's mother warned him very clearly not to put himself in this situation, such that he will make an unwise decision and a choice. So for example, in the picture, if you can see, if you are intoxicated and you are within a pack of wolves, what might your brain suddenly tell you instead? Oh, they are cute little puppies, let me go and hug them, right? But what might happen, right, in such a situation? You may be eaten by the pack of wolves instead. So that's what happens when you are intoxicated and when you are unable to think for yourself. In verses 6 and 7, some have interpreted this in the wrong way to say, let's continue to give drink to all. Let me just go back for the sake of recalling the text. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and in verse 7, let him drink and forget his poverty. And this has been interpreted incorrectly by some as, oh, drinking is fine, and going all the way is fine. But no, it is actually sarcasm. Sarcasm, in the sense that only those who are dying, who are perishing, shall drink and drink and drink until they are no more. They are dead in that sense. So when I read this text, what came to my mind immediately was, those Chinese pugilistic drama serials. In Chinese, it's called wuxia, whereby the hero or whoever, he might fight in a battle, and then he lost the battle. Maybe the battle was to save maybe some maiden, or maybe to defend the group that he was at, or maybe he lost territory. And then what will happen is he goes to this tavern or this drinking house or whatever, and then he calls for the waiter, 小二, and then he will get a barrel of what we will know today as rice wine, and then he will drink and drink and drink, and then he goes all woozy and all, right? And he will keep saying, oh, I wish I could have defeated, oh, let me just die and drown my sorrows. So, in verses 6 and 7, the same metaphor or the same situation applies, in which people without God have to search for a way to forget their misery. And in that sense, this is actually a sarcastic warning that strong drink is for the perishing. Strong drink is not meant for those who are not perishing. And if we have God with us, we should be turning to God in our struggles rather than for the things of this world. The danger of excesses tells us that we are able to enjoy the things of this world. For example, we can have a 50-50 wine and water mixture. That's what they did in the ancient days. But if you go to the extreme and you have excesses and you forget the purpose of your living, that is where there will be trouble. So let's move on to verses 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the speechless in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. I will call these two verses, I'll term these two verses as, with great power come great responsibility. I think this is a very famous quote by, it's not Spider-Man, it comes from his uncle, okay? Which I forgot his name suddenly, off the top of my head, but you can tell me that. But it didn't come from Spider-Man, right? I mean, he was taught this statement. So, in verses 1 to 7, the message was very direct from King Lemuel's mother. Don't chase after the things of this world. Don't destroy yourself. Don't give in to excesses. Always stay focused. Why? And the answer is in verses 8 and 9. To defend the weak and the needy. Speak up to those who are speechless. And as the king, use your authority for the right purpose. And so the question is, how will you use your powers or your authority when life presents you with great opportunities? Or even if it's not just a great opportunity, just normal situations. How would you use your talents and your powers? Because you must recall that ultimately we are all equal heirs. We are all part of the Royal Priesthood. So this slide here, I think will evoke a lot of chatter right now, especially at home. We are not going to screen the movie here, of course. But it's to illustrate 2 points. One on screen and one off screen. So the first on screen, these are not just the only Avengers, as we know. These are just the key Avengers. I mean, there are many, many others behind who help to save the earth. But the idea is that with all their powers, they do their bit. Alone, they may not be able to save the earth or save the world. But by doing what they can do and putting their powers to good use, they manage to overcome the various odds, right? And off screen, I would like to share what I read online about the actor Robert Downey Jr., who acted as Iron Man. So it is said that Robert Downey Jr., he had a lot of fame because of the Iron Man series, which came before the Avengers. And because of that, he was able to command a very, very high salary. So for the Avengers franchise or something, it was said that he was paid up to 70 million for the movie. And he was horrified to hear that some of his co-stars, one of them I think was Chris Hemsworth, Thor, the guy on the right, the one with the hammer. Apparently, he was paid less than 5 million. Right, so can you imagine? They are all Avengers. I mean, they are movie stars in their own right. And one is paid 70, the other one is paid less than 5. And he was told that some of them even were paid about 200,000 in this extremely best-selling movie. So Robert Downey Jr. was very unhappy and very upset, and he actually went to Marvel and he told them, if you don't give my co-stars a raise or readjust their contracts, then I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit the whole series altogether, and you will suffer. So, okay, I don't know whether did this have to do with the fact that Iron Man later on died in the final endgame. But the idea is this. He had the power to arm twist or to give his side of the negotiation with Marvel Studios. Right? He could speak up for his co-stars who were, so-called underpaid. So I think for those of us who are familiar with this Avengers series, this is $1 billion franchise, billions of dollars. And so Robert Downey Jr. is saying, for such a well-doing and well-received franchise, why should any of my co-stars who are equally involved in this whole franchise be paid only a measly sum of $200,000? Okay, I want to emphasize this, not to say please get more pay for your staff or what. But the idea here is to really emphasize on speaking up for the speechless, right? As King Lemuel's mother said, standing up for what's right. And so this leads me to really go deeper into the sense of perspectives. So I start first with the individual. Like I mentioned, this sermon is not only for the mothers. Yes, there's a focus on the mothers, but the rest of us here, we should also see that we are a royal priesthood, and there's much power bestowed onto us. And we must learn how to wield the power, control that power, and ask ourselves, how much do we consider ourselves as privileged or in a position of power? So I guess when I ask you such a question on what do you consider as privilege, the Singaporean stereotype will come as perhaps, I guess, if you are in a landed property, then you are privileged, or if you are a CEO, then you are privileged. But is that really the case? I would like to challenge that. Is it so that, is it true that if you stay in, let's say, you share a room, and you are I think you have no more than $100 in your bank account, then that means that you are not privileged. Is that really correct or not? Well, maybe to a certain extent, yes, because everything is relative. But there's always an idea that someone else is always less privileged. Perhaps in our work, we ask ourselves, how do we consider using our position of power? Do we backstab others to get to the next level? Do we destroy others so that we can go up ourselves in the chase to be the next CEO or the next chairman or what have you? Do we put money before any other considerations? Like, if we have to choose between God and career, what would come first? Are these pertinent questions answered at the top of our heads or at the bottom of the pile? So these are questions that I would like us to really consider it. And to leave this tangent, to go back to our sermon focus on mothers, and I put there in parentheses, fathers too, don't run away. It is definitely a useful reminder of the things that we should teach and to remind our next generation. Not about money or success, but how to use the powers bestowed onto us wisely, the talents given to us wisely, to serve the people in need. And more importantly, how are we acting ourselves that teach our children the right things? Do we act in a way that perhaps we are xenophobic? We shun certain people? Will our children do the same? Like I mentioned, if you tell them, do what I say, don't do what I do, will they really follow? And how do we actually act in a way and give the right advice in a way that our next generation of the royal priesthood may be able to accept? So these are questions that we have to ask ourselves every single minute. I wouldn't even say day, every single minute or second in that sense. Because as we conduct ourselves well, our children will see it and learn it and be the reflection of who we are. They may be influenced by many other people around them, but ultimately when they go back home, it is the parents. And perhaps, as I linked to the story earlier, it could be the mother who is the one to have that bigger influence on your children. Right? It may not be so wrong to say that our children don't come to their fathers for anything. I don't know. I know that my kids always want want to sleep in the same bedroom as their mother and not me. So I'm like, okay, fine. But the idea here is, how do we actually teach our children then? Are our actions reflective of the words that we say? So with all these difficult questions in our heads now, I would like to give you one piece of encouragement, which should not be unsurprising, and that is Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I emphasize the King of Kings, because equally, he is royalty. We are royalty, we are kings, but he is the king, with the capital K, of us kings. And with this emphasis here, what did Jesus do, as we all know? He came down to earth to free us from our sins by his blood, to make us kings and priests to God, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 1, verses 5 to 6. For someone of the greatest privilege and position and power, he came down to earth to heal the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captive, give sight to the blind, and preach the gospel. These are examples that we can learn and we can follow and we can emulate. It may not be specific word for word, that you have to go and find someone who is captive and then open his bars and then let him get free. No. It is the idea that as long as you have the strength, the will, and the heart, you should be going out there in your own capacity to help those in need. And I also want to add the last part here, to preach the gospel. Because ultimately, that is also our calling as Christians. Ultimately, that is also what we should be doing to grow the royal priesthood. And if I may even add another tangent to this point, it is that even if you see a young kid who is not your child, your actions may also influence that child. And what more if both you and the child are in the same church building or recognized as part of the royal priesthood. So ultimately, what I would like to conclude is this. There's a Chinese idiom that says, there's always a mountain taller than the other. 一山总有一山高. But my takeaway that I would like all of us to have here is the opposite, which is also true. If you have one mountain that is taller than another, surely there's always one mountain that is shorter than the other. And why do I want to emphasize this? It is that although the Chinese idiom is to encourage us not to be proud, right? To say, you, no matter what you do, there's always someone that you could always follow and emulate, yada, yada, yada. But the idea here for today, the reminder here today, is that when we reach the pinnacle, when we scale the peaks, look down and see that there are many other hills that are shorter than us. The reminder that we should be there to help these smaller peaks, shorter mountains. And so, what is expected of you as a royal priest from the individual? I think that is the part that I would like to emphasize here. That as we read what King Lemuel's mother told him, in verses 1 to 9. We should have the understanding that with great power comes this responsibility, and that we should always lend the helping hand. And the fourth point, how are we, mothers especially, for today, preparing the next generation? What are our actions like? Do we go around the house every day shouting and screaming? Do we always give off bad vibes about other people, showing ourselves to be short-tempered, to be unable to control ourselves, to speak poorly of others, to not want to speak when others are in trouble? And yet, at the same time, still expect that when we teach our children the Bible, expect that they follow whatever that we try to tell them in words, but not our actions. So it's really a reminder to all of us. And finally, to those of us here today or online, how can you be part of the Royal Priesthood? How can you be part of this family that knows that beyond all the struggles, there is no need to turn to strong drink. There is no need to continually fight against the odds. But let the odds be decided by the one who is in control of it all, who is Christ and God. So, with that, I would like to encourage all of us that as we ponder upon these questions, if you may have further inquiries, or if you have made the decision to turn to Christ, do drop an email, I guess, or a call to the church. Or for those of us here, to respond as we have the invitation song.